I wish I lived in way back. I wish I was more laid back. I wish I didn't mind when people paid to not pay me back. I wish I had a shorter list. I wish I was a materialist. I wish I did not feel like solving problems with my fist.
What's up, my wizards? Dev, SBMTG down there, Mtg Decks, YouTube.com. Today, the onslaught of monocolored decks continues with blue. We're doing blue today, and a deck that a lot of people are talking about because it's a way to play a lot of power in a totally different deck for a decent budget. This is Blulamog. This is basically a mono blue control ramp Eldrazi deck. It's really weird. It's a super weird deck. You don't see a whole lot of decks like it, but it basically takes Green-Red's philosophy of playing huge guys, you know, and ramping into them. The deck still has some ramp available to it, but we play huge dudes, we ramp into them, but instead of just going as quickly as possible with stuff like Explosive Vegetation and This is Pilgrimage, we're going to take our time and just counter our opponent's plays until we can get to one of our Eldrazi Titans. As usual, I'll start you by running through the creatures real quick. We have 8 whole creatures in this deck, but they're all Eldrazi. They're all huge dudes that can just win the game by themselves. And we'll start with what feels like a super important creature in the deck. This is Conduit of Ruin, and we're going to play a 3 of. Well, Conduit is obviously just a huge guy that can win the game by himself. All of our creatures are, by the way. They're all huge Eldrazi. But Conduit has a really, really important role to play in the deck. When you play him, he's going to search up either an Ulamog or a Kozilek and allow you to play it for cheaper. That's obviously good and works pretty well with our next creature. We're just going to play one of Drowner of Hope in the deck. Drowner of Hope is a card that you see in this deck occasionally. Sometimes you'll see it instead of Conduit of Ruin. I don't know about that. I really, really like Conduit of Ruin in this deck. But mostly, I like the both of them together. Now, obviously, you can't search up Drowner of Hope with the Conduit of Ruin. That would be awesome. But if you do have a Drowner in your hand, you can play a Conduit, go search up your Ulamog. Next turn, you'll play your Drowner of Hope for 2 less mana. That's nice. That'll put you at 8 mana when you get your Eldrazi Scion tokens. That's exactly how much you'll need to play an Ulamog with a Conduit in play. Not only that, but Drowner's just really, really good defense. Not only does he provide ramp, he also provides defense and effectively puts another mode onto Warping Wail, so that's good. But here are our giant Eldrazi Titan things that we're ramping into and searching up with Conduit. We're going to play 3 copies of Ulamog and 1 copy of Kozilek. Ulamog, you don't have to explain too much. He's just like the big, dumb ramp target in the format. You know, you go get him, you win the game. Kozilek, on the other hand, really interesting card in this deck. I like at least just the one of. We're sort of a control deck, and control decks love to draw all those cards. And control decks love that other ability too. Discard cards to counterspell and keep all of our mana open while we do it. That's awesome. And the menace on it, small interaction here, but I want to point it out because it does matter sometimes. We're playing a bunch of Engulf the Shore in the deck, and with Kozilek, if you Engulf the Shore with a Kozilek in play, a few things could happen. You're either going to return all their creatures to their hand, in which case you can just swing through free with Kozilek, or you're going to return all but 1 creature to their hand, at which point they can't block Kozilek, because menace, or you're going to return all but like 2 of their creatures to their hand. It really doesn't get too much bigger than that. But you return all but 2 of their creatures, and if they want to not take damage from a swinging Kozilek, they're going to have to block with both their guys and very likely lose both of them. So, you know, small interaction, doesn't happen all the time, but Kozilek in play, and then you play Engulf the Shore, can actually end up you just win. Another good way of winning the game is just resolving an Ulamog in the first place. That usually does the trick. We're going to play 4 artifacts in the deck. All 4 of them are Hedron Archive. Play set of this because, you know, it's already played in the Green-Red ramp deck. We have access to generic mana in this deck, so we might as well play it. And again, control deck, so we love drawing cards. Everything about Hedron Archive is nice. It's the only pure, dedicated ramp card that we're going to play in this Eldrazi ramp deck, basically. But Hedron Archive is just insane, you know, puts you 2 mana up and allows you to get some card advantage, too. On into the spells here, and I want to talk about 2 colorless spells first, actually. We're going to play a 3 of Spatial Contortion and a 4 of Warping Wail in the deck. Spatial Contortion is just a way for this mono blue deck to play some removal, and obviously we can target any of our Eldrazi with it and not kill them and end up doing a huge amount of damage if they're unblocked. But yeah, we really don't get to play much removal in mono blue, and this is just an easy way of doing that. We're making colorless mana anyway. So let's play Spatial Contortion. It's removal. We're also going to play 4 copies of Warping Wail, which is super good and vital to the deck. This is a key piece, and it will always have something to do. Because you'd be surprised, first of all, how many creatures that first ability can take out. Kind of a lot. Tokens notwithstanding, there's still a bunch of actual real creatures that this can take out. Aside from that, though, this does obviously counter sorceries, but even if you don't have a creature to kill or a sorcery to counter, this does basically amount to ramp, which is exactly what this deck wants. And a lot of times it will function as a ramp spell in this deck, but it's also super versatile and can do a lot of things for you. So, love Warping Wail, and I totally think the 4 of is justified. We're going to play some counter spells in the deck. We're going to play up blue strength. Basically, we're going to not let stuff hit the board in the early game, you know, turn 2, 3, 4, if we can possibly help it. And then we'll drop a huge Eldrazi dude that lets us search into a huge Eldrazi dude. We'll just close the game out that way, ideally. But counter spells, really good way of doing that. So what we're going to end up doing here is playing 4 Clash of Wills, 3 Spell Shrivel, and 1 Void Shatter. A lot of these decks play 4 copies of Spell Shrivel and no Void Shatter, but I really do like Void Shatter a lot. You know, Spell Shrivel is basically a Void Shatter that's easier to cast like 90% of the time, but I do like to have 1 copy of Void Shatter to make sure that no matter what, I have 1 copy of a counterspell that's unconditional. As far as Clash of Wills goes, though, it's very, very important because it can counter spells on turn 2, which is insanely, again, very important for the deck and keeping the board clean in the early turns. We've got to have something like that. And Clash stays relevant all the way into the late game as well. The deck plays a 2 of Anticipate. I feel like it might be able to use this slot slightly better, actually. I didn't mind it in testing. You know, Anticipate is always inoffensive. There's nothing wrong with Anticipate. It's definitely like the cheapest and most efficient and fastest, you know, instant speed card selection tool in the format. And control decks really, really want that, you know. So if we're digging for a counterspell, Anticipate's great. Into their turn, Anticipate's great. So, you know, if we're digging for a specific card, Anticipate's great. So Anticipate is good in a lot of situations. Again, I feel like we could be doing more, but Anticipate, always good. And like I promised, to finish the main deck, 3 copies of Engulf the Shore, an all-star card in the deck. I'd really like to put this up to 4 copies, especially in a lot of local formats, you know. Honestly, the format is creature-based in and of itself. So 4 of Engulf the Shores, I don't feel like it'll ever be dead or anything. I just have really liked Engulf the Shores in the deck. Great reset button. And yeah, I know they'll just recast the creatures, but at this point, this is a tempo play that gets you into the later turns, which is all you need. If you can just get a couple of extra turns of breathing room, you can play huge dudes and completely turn the tide. Joke? Yeah, we'll count that as a joke. There's 28 lands in the deck because the deck wants to play all of the lands. It has to get its land drops. So it's going to be as consistent as possible and play 28 lands to make sure it's got some dang old lands. A couple of things to talk about. Mage-Ring Network is actually really, really good. It gives you something to dump your mana into if you got nothing else to do. If you're holding up a counter spell and they don't cast a spell, that happens, you can just pour your mana into a storage counter. And eventually, you know, put yourself a turn or 2 up on a huge Eldrazi Titan. Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, super nice, Hank Hill. Card is nice because once we get to 7 mana, we have 8 mana, which 8 mana is a pretty important figure in this deck because if we have a Conduit of Ruin out and 8 mana, we can play one of our 10 mana Eldrazi Titans. But we can't play too many colorless sources because we have to maximize the effectiveness of something like Engulf the Shores and play as many islands as we can. So that's an important consideration too. Here's the super simple sideboard right here. There's 4 Negate that gets rid of Planeswalkers, any kind of removal that we're worried about, and enchantments, just a bunch of stuff, you know, Pyromancer's Goggles, everything. Lots of stuff that we're worried about. Negate also helps us thwart other ramp decks that are just much faster than us and reach the same conclusion as us, you know, 2 turns before we do. Negate can be really good because you'll be able to counterspell any ramp that they play, so that's not bad either. Displacement Wave is in there against the onslaught of tokens decks. You know, green-white tokens, maybe the best deck in the format right now, and it pops up a lot. Displacement Wave, awesome against those, obviously. Thought-Knot Seer is in there as a really good mid-range drop, good against control when it resolves, you know, and good against a lot of things, actually. You know, there's a lot of stuff high up on the curve that this can come up under and take out of their hands. So Thought-Knot Seer is good against a lot of decks, but mostly in the control matchups. And then Reality Smasher is just good against a lot of decks that play a ton of removal, which we see a lot of right now. And this is something else that just wrecks face against certain decks. Mostly, again, the ones that are just, you know, 30 pieces of removal and a couple of win conditions. Here are your power rankings for the deck right here. A final score of 62, which doesn't sound like much, but it is fairly competitive, and a lot of writers are talking about this deck right now. We're just not really buying it. We're not really sure the best way to build the deck, and the deck has been built a lot of different ways to this date. In the last like 2 weeks, the deck is starting to catch on. Mostly, we're just trying to prolong the game until we can drop a huge guy. And that's sometimes not realistic against some decks in the format. You know, the Aristocrats deck hurts us quite a bit. You know, we have some game against aggro decks, but even, you know, mono white aggro, green white aggro, and green white tokens even, which isn't necessarily an aggro deck, more of a mid-range deck really. But any deck that goes very wide, plays a lot of creatures, we're going to have some trouble with, especially decks that strike quickly if we don't get an engulf, you know. You know, the second game we have some ways. We have Displacement Wave that helps out a lot, but sometimes, you know, an aggro deck that gets a really fast start is going to be a problem for us. But we have good game against the other ramp decks in the format. That's pretty cool. And we have pretty decent game against some of the control decks in the format, especially game 2. But the best news is that the deck is not necessarily super budget or anything, but it's under $100. Right now the deck will cost you about 75 bucks on TcgPlayer to make, because Ulamog has dropped considerably. You know, I think it was like 30 bucks at one time, now it's half that. So, you know, the deck actually is not that expensive to build and play right now in the scheme of standard. You know, for a competitive standard deck, you could easily spend, you know, 3 or 4 times this, and you know, that's not hard. That's all I've got for now. Shuffle it up. Let me know how you feel about it. This is a really, really different deck, to say the least. You don't really see too many control ramp decks. So that's fresh, but what's next? Next up is going to be the State of the Brunion. I will give you the top 5 decks in Shadows over Innistrad Standard right now. It's going to be basically an aggregate of all the tournament results since Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad. I've combed through those, I've gone over them, I've analyzed which decks appear the most, and I'm going to give you those plus lists for them and how they work in our next video. So that's a pretty ambitious project, but I love doing State of Standard. Stay tuned for that. And then after that, Mono Green Triple Tech, and I might do Crawling Sensation in between. That's a lot of stuff, so make sure you're subscribed so you get all that stuff, or just check the channel every few minutes, and eventually a new video will be up. It works that way. Just if you enjoyed this content, hit the like button. That helps like a super tremendous amount. And then share the video and comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.